Hello, everyone. My name is Zhenya Gershman, and I'm an ambassador for both Blick Art Materials and Royal Talents North America. And I'm delighted to have everybody on Blick community join us live today for a demonstration, a special demonstration, how and why to use nude turpentine for successful portraiture. I wanted to get to know a little bit who is watching and where you're coming from. So feel free to put comments in the chat. Tell us where you're watching from. And I love questions. So throughout the presentation, please ask away. I'll be delighted to try to answer as many questions as I can live, and I'll be typing later as well my answers. To tell you a little bit more about myself, I'm a painter, educator, and art historian, and I'm a founder of Z Art Academy. Some of my students are watching today, so a special shout out to all my students, and a big thank you for a larger Z Art Academy community as well supporting. I wanted to tell you how I began painting and why I paint in oil. And that journey started a little while back when I was 10 years old. And I have something special to show you. I was born in Soviet Union, and I was in an old house and went up in the attic, and I found this old French easel, and I wasn't even sure how to open it. But after struggling a little bit, imagine I'm 10 years old, I have no idea what this is. I opened it, and inside there was these treasures, and this belonged to my aunt. My late aunt, who passed away when I was 4 years old, and here she is. You could see I look a little bit like her, a bit of a resemblance there. And she was a brilliant art historian and a painter. And so her easel box was there. And though she was gone, and already passed away, her paints were still alive. And that's the magic of oil painting. So I started dabbing away on the palette, and I found a tiny little container just like this, like what we'll be using today, and some mysterious bottle. So I poured a bit of that liquid, though it was not nude turpentine just yet, and I figured out that you need a paint thinner in order to paint, and magic started to happening, and paint started to flowing, and that's how I became a painter and artist. So I wanted to share that with you because I truly believe that portraiture and painting with oil is a living thing. It is a way to even break the boundary between the living and the dead, and talk about through centuries with other artists and creative people. So I invite you today to be part of this tradition, and we're going to be focusing on the nude turpentine. So I want to feature that one more time. It's a product by Utrecht, distributed by Blick, and it's really interesting. It's called NOOD because literally it stands for no odor solvent. And Utrecht has other older turpentine that I was also using, a paint thinner. And at first I was skeptical. I thought, what would be the difference? What would be the big deal? But I have found as I tried the nude turpentine, huge advantages. And that's what I'd like to feature to you, how it's a very special and wonderful portrait. But to back up a little bit, we need to understand why use turpentine in the first place. It can achieve many things. First, when we get beautiful paints, and I use Rembrandt brand, this is my favorite oil paint that's out there. I highly recommend it. It's just delicious. When you open it up, it comes out ready to use from the tube, but it is so concentrated, actually matches, you could see my favorite color. It's so concentrated and the pigment of such high quality that this tube will last me a long time if I use my paint thinner to dilute it. So the paint thinner actually dilutes your paints. It makes it last longer. It's great for underpainting because if you paint too thickly, a la prima, the first time, too thickly, your paint might crack. So you want to build up the layers, and the thinner allows you to do that. And I'm going to show you how today. The second thing, it's great for cleaning, but not just cleaning your brushes and getting the oil, the stubborn oil paint out of your bristles, but actually cleaning up the edges. And that's another thing I'm going to show you, using turpentine as a tool to clean up the edges of in your portraiture. And we can do all kinds of effects. This is the funnest part because turpentine can blur. So you could see this painting is supposed to be out of focus. That's on purpose. That's an effect that I'm trying to create with my turpentine. or you can use it to drip and create all kinds of fun dripping expressive effects, or you could use it for texture. And here I could show you there's all kinds of textural effects. So turpentine means, or paint thinner, can use so many different things, and that is the focus of my presentation. So remind you, please send your questions. And without too much ado, we're going to begin our process. I want to switch my camera and show you the subject of today's presentation or demonstration. And this is something that I've been dedicating my last year of my life, working a new body of work, a portrait of a real great hero. It's a political prisoner. His name is Alexei Navalny, and he's unjustly held in a Russian prison. And I've been making his portraits in order to tell his story. And I thought, what a great way to show you how this drawing can come alive using literally a paint thinner that's liberating the drawing and the paint into becoming free to express. So freedom of this material with the subject matter. I have some photographs to show you what I'm going to be referencing, and I've developed the drawing on, this looks like cardboard, but it's not. This is an oil canvas, and I have prepared it in a very special way. So I used, let's see, beautiful gesso. This is by Amsterdam Gesso, about 3 coats. And the top coat, I actually use Holbein color gesso to create this toned ground. And the reason I do this is so that my paint goes on smoothly, but also so that I can achieve this chiaroscuro effect, the effect of light and dark, and the mid-tone of the colored ground coming through. This really eases the painting. I highly do not recommend starting on the white canvas. I highly recommend preparing it this way. I'm going to take your attention to my palette. So let's switch view. This is my palette, and though I'll be painting monochromatically today with a limited color effect, look how many colors go in to create my palette. So it's interesting that lots of colors can create a nice tone in the face, and I'm going to be showing you the subtlety that many colors does not mean colorful. It means very subtle, and so it's a little bit of an oxymoron, but you'll see why. I have my titanium white, which I highly recommend over the zinc white because it's a little bit more opaque and easier to use. And I have my favorite Naples collection. This is Naples Yellow Green. If I open it up, it's basically off-white. It has a little bit of a cool effect to it. They come in many different tones. So here's another Naples yellow, but a little bit deeper. So this will be great for effects of light. And you can see them. I'm starting my palette with all my light tones. And we'll be using a lot of different ochres. So yellow ochre light. We have another one, an orange ochre. This is something that I just love, a new color that I discovered recently. We have some siennas. So we have a raw sienna and brown ochre. Look, that's a third different ochre that we're using, a beautiful golden color. And what else do we got here? We have Caput Mortum. So a nice Latin title. And it has this beautiful, a little bit of a maroon and violet quality to it. Fantastic for shadows. Couldn't recommend it more. And a few other things, quickly just to go through it. Permanent Matter Deep. It's almost like a wine color without which I can't imagine doing deep, darker shadows. And that paired in with ultramarine violet and raw umber is just a beautiful combination. And just for a little surprise, we've got 2 blues. And there's a lot of blue in the face. And I'm using the Cobalt Turquoise blue. Take a look at how gorgeous this color is. And This is a largely overlooked color, but all of my students fell in love with it. It's called King's Blue. I wonder if you use it in your studio at home in your paintings. I highly recommend this color. Oh, and I have a splash of red just because I can't live without the red. So this is a permanent red medium. So let's get started. You can see that I have a few of these jars. In the first jar, I have a little bit of a medium. My favorite medium is poppy seed oil. It's just like linseed oil, but it's a little bit more translucent and dries a little bit slower. And it's something that just a material that I love working with, but it is equivalent to walnut or linseed oil. And of course, I have my NOOD turpentine. I have to tell you that it has absolutely zero odor. And it's just wonderful. You don't feel suffocated when you paint with it. And it has a different kind of consistency. In order to show that to you, I have two jars. In the middle jar, I have the NOOD turpentine, and on the jar to its bottom on your to my right on your bottom on the screen is the traditional turpentine or paint thinner. So you will see that the consistency will be a little bit different. And now we're going to start painting. If you have any questions, please send them. This is a great time to ask. I'm about to get started. I'm going to get my favorite brushes. So here I have my Princeton brush that is very long, has a long blade and flat at the end, so I can both lay the color but also get great details. All right, so let me animate my brush, bring it to life by using a little bit of NOOD turpentine. And you always want to dip your brush, but you also want to get rid of it. It's a powerful material, so you want to kind of get rid of it on the edge, because even just a little bit goes a long way. And if I never dig into my paint, I kind of try to edge at its lip, and look at how beautifully and creamy it's starting to go. So already I'm not using any oil medium, but it almost, I'm actually going to paint without my poppy seed for a while. We might just use it for some effect, but I'm going to make most of this painting just with my NOOD turpentine. And just look at how beautiful the consistency. So the difference is, if I took a regular turpentine, I'm going to get a little bit of it in my brush. Look how much more translucent and weak it is. It's not as thick, and it's not as it's a little bit too runny and sometimes difficult to manipulate. So I do prefer this new product. Highly, highly encourage you to try it. All right, let's switch the view so you could see my painting. That's me for a moment. And here's the painting. So this is all prepared in charcoal. So I simply used black charcoal pencil, very soft, and a little crumb of white pastel, and allowing a lot of our surface of the underpainting of the canvas to show through. I did want to show you that I used my favorite Princeton brush, which is kind of like a rubber ant and has this strange tooth. And this is how I sculpt a little bit with both the paint but also with my drawing, so I can move and create this texture that almost feels like a corrugated cardboard. But this is really created with this sort of brush. Okay, so this is all charcoal. So if I go over, I see it kind of erases. It's not permanent, right? It's just if I blow in this drawing, it looks very solid, but it will disappear. So now my brush is loaded, and just with a little bit of my turpentine, it's going to apply the highlight that I have on it, but it's also going to pick up the charcoal, the white pastel particles right underneath, and turn the drawing into painting almost magically. Let's see if we don't have any questions just yet, but please send them. I'll love to hear from you. Okay, so what I'm working on is I'm starting from where the light is hitting. You'll often hear the artist say, start dark to light or light to dark. This is really a preference of how you want to. There's all kinds of schools and traditions. I kind of paint by my mood, and today I felt like starting with the light side and showing you the effects of light. Let me just get a better picture here so I could see a little bit more. I'm also using my iPhone to see a little bit more of the details here. Now this is already all paint and starting to transform very quickly. And I'm going to just dab a little bit of that. Remember that caput mortem that we talked about? A strange title with a little bit of the brown ochre into my brush. It already has the white on it. And I'm going to, the turpentine that I used to load my brush, I haven't dipped my brush. It's still going. I mean, it's really powerful. And it's carrying my paint. It's thinning my paint to a perfect consistency. And you could see I'm starting to model that forehead. I think we have enough time today that we can really work out the details in the portrait and see how we can model the eyes and get the sense of the presence, of the human presence, and even the sense of looking out of the portrait. I have a question. Does the charcoal get the paint muddy? And the answer is yes, and that's why I love it, because you want the skin tones not to be too pure, right? You want them to be, even though this is a monochromatic painting, even still, you want a kind of a subtlety. So the muddiness of the charcoal actually helps to take the high vibration of the hue, the brilliance of the color, and turn it more subtle, you see? So I love that. What is the size of the brush? This is size 6. My favorite brush is size 6 in Princeton brushes. And the size 8 is the larger brush that I use for my background. And I also love size 6 that you'll see me use for details. It's an angled brush, which is absolutely miraculous. I make all my students buy that. And I have, is this the, let's see, with the lean layer you're using with the NOOD paint. So yes, this is the lean layer. I'm painting very thinly. So the lean layer refers to that, if I wipe this off, you'll see the underpainting underneath it or the ground underneath it. You want to build up towards the end of the painting. You don't want to, I'm going to dip. This is the first time I'm going to dip into my NOOD thinner since the original demonstration that I showed you. That's how long it went. And you don't want to clog up the pores of the canvas. You don't want to paint too thickly or you'll risk your painting cracking. So you want to build it up gently. Look at this. This is me just using a little bit of almost mud in my brush, but some of that white chalk is going to mix in. I'm turning what I wanted to show you with this turpentine. I'm turning pastel into paint. I'm actually making my own paint here in a way. Isn't that fun? Okay, let me know if you're enjoying this or if there's a certain trick or part of the painting that you'd like to see developed. I'm happy to jump around and show you how to paint the nose or the eyes or the mouth. Tell me where your interest lies. Look at this. I'm just going to use, you see how the forehead looks already different from the rest of the painting? Let's go into that amazing frown, that little wrinkle. This is always difficult to paint if you're a beginner, but fear it not, because notice there is a recipe to this, and that is not to draw lines, but actually to bring a little bit of a different tone and slightly different color. And next to it, for contrast, I'm going to come in and bring a little bit of a contrast. So I'm not really drawing lines. You see, I'm kind of holding my brush flatly and getting in there. And again, I haven't used even one drop of oil medium or my poppy seed that I've put out. I have not been needing to use this. All done by NOOD thinner. Here, I'm almost drawing sculpturally, building the feeling. If I was to touch his forehead, I'm feeling the way the wrinkle runs, and if I would caress it this way, right? So you kind of caress the face as you paint. You feel it become real under your brush. I have another question. Do I clean my brush between different color areas? No, I generally do not. I have my little rag, and sometimes I'll dab it a little bit to remove the extra color. But I prefer, again, a little bit surprising, but I prefer a slightly dirty brush because Everything is related to everything else. So you want a little bit of this color carried over into the next area of the painting. So here I'm on the forehead. Now I'm jumping onto the nose, right? And I want a little bit of the relationship. Everything should be related to something else. And with this, let me show you how that works. Let's look at my palette really quickly. So here's my dirty brush, right? If I want to go like here, if I touched it, it makes a color. And if I want to shift the tone, or let's take a little bit of the nude thinner, and I want to go a little bit darker. Let's dip into that brown ochre and see the same color. I can shift it a little bit. I can even put a tiny little bit of this permanent matter deep. And look, it's going to go a little bit reddish, or I can add a little bit of my blue, that Amazing King's blue. And it's not going to go blue. It's just going to go a little richer, a little darker. You see how they're all related. So, and if I wanted to go a little lighter, I'll take this color and look at this. Let's take a little bit of that Naples yellow. And the same color goes a little bit lighter. So I can, all of these colors right here, they're all related in the flesh that I'm painting. So in a way, I don't need to clean my brush. I hope that answers the question. And we'll jump back to the painting. So here it is. We've loaded a brush. Let's see what I've got here. I've got a little bit of that muddy charcoal here. And look, it actually shifting my tone a little darker, just what I wanted. You see how almost like magic, it paints itself. I wanted to show you how easy it is to paint if you've done your underdrawing. And I did my underdrawing before we started, just simply because it took me probably took me about 45 minutes just to create this drawing. So you want to take your time. You're not wasting time. You're actually saving time when you paint. Do you see how this painting is already transforming? Let's add a tiny little bit of that bright cadmium, that beautiful red, right into this area. And you'll notice that it'll feel like the skin is glowing a little bit. Many people ask me how to paint, believe it or not, how to paint eyebrows. And eyebrows is basically, the trick for them is not to make them cartoony, but to paint the structure underneath them. To just suggest, eyebrow casts a shadow onto the eye. So if you start by painting that subtly, you don't want to outline them. You don't want to paint them like a drawn out, right? Here, even at the top, I'm going to take a little bit of our Naples green. And with that beautiful Naples green, I'm going to establish the difference that the light can penetrate and hit on the frontal lobe or just above the eyebrow, and down below it we are casting the shadow, and I'm softening the edge in between so it won't look cartoony, right? Let me know what your thoughts are, what your questions are. I always love to hear from you. Makes it so much more interesting and engaging when I know what you would like to hear. And we're going to do all kinds of effects in the moment, blurring and dripping, but we need to build up the paint a little bit, right? Build up the layers. So this is where the brush, you could see the oil paint from the tube is refusing to go smoothly. So I need to dip my brush a little bit back into the nude thinner, and look at the difference. Now I can blend, now it can go, and it's very smooth. Now, one of its main difference between the older versions of thinners is that it actually has a slower evaporation rate, and so it lasts. You can blend longer. It's not so quick to jump off your surface and dry, so you have longer time to work with it, to blend with it, to play with it, to enjoy it. And once again, as I mentioned, it has a body. It says almost like it gives the body or the thickness to the paint. So you can paint very thinly, but at the same time, it doesn't, you see, I'm putting a little more turpentine, but it doesn't run. Here I'm going to use the wrong turpentine or too much turpentine. This is the old brand. And I'm going to, you see how it's starting to run immediately. So if that happens, I'm going to blot my brush. I'm going to use a little rag to blot it. That was the old version of the thinner, and you could see how the new version doesn't run like this as easily, which I love because it allows me to manipulate my portrait much easier. So you see how, okay, so we have a comment. I love how you bring out the character in your portraits. Right, the character is the most important part to me because if there's no character, not trying to copy, I'm actually using the photograph just as a starting point. And I'm definitely not trying to copy. I'm not a slave to that image. I want to look deeper underneath the skin. And if you will, the artist is the paint thinner. We thin the layers of the invisible and allow it to show through. So notice how I'm working on the shadow side. Let's add a tiny little bit of blue into it. I'm using a little bit of that turquoise blue and a little bit of the king's blue. And again, with my dirty brush, so it can still look like a skin tone or belongs to the same face, but shifting, you see the shifting the tone a little bit. Let's see what you guys are saying. It seems like you're using a tiny amount of oil paint on your layers. Is this your process? Correct. Let me show you the palette once more. And you'll notice that I actually didn't put out a lot of oil paint. This is one thing that I love about oil paint. If I take, let's clean up my brush for a second. If I dig into my oil paint, and this is nude, again, thinner, look at this. I take a little tiny amount, but look how far it will go. Stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch, and off it goes and goes, and it goes off the camera, right? It goes off my palette. So I can use this tiny little amount with my thinner to cover huge grounds. And you want to be sensitive. Again, you want, in my opinion, you want to let the canvas breathe. You don't want to clog it up too much. So I am using very thin areas of paint. Let's go back to the painting. All right. Do you change your ground color for different portraits, or is this a background universal? Absolutely, I change my background colors. I change my palette. The colors that I choose for each time I paint are different. So I didn't even know what I will do, what I will use for this presentation today until this afternoon, because I wanted to connect with how I was feeling about this portrait and choose the colors that will carry that message. And so I choose the different colors and I choose different ground. I wonder if I have some samples I'll be able to show you in a moment of how you can achieve different moods with using different grounds. I highly recommend, again, this whole by Gessos for the top coat. They come really liquid and they spread beautifully and create this gorgeous surface. And you can even mix them together to make your unique ground. It's really fun. That's part of the art is actually begins, even if you're a figurative artist, it begins with layering your grounds and working abstractly. So here it's really indivisible. That was a great question. Thank you, Jen. Okay, top of the nose. Let's form a little bit of the bulbous part of the nose. I still haven't used any medium, just all nude thinner. And quickly I switch to, you see, add with my dirty brush a little bit of the caput mortem, a little bit of the brown ochres here to form the side. This is all connected, but the value, when I say the value, is really what I mean is the light to dark, right? It's not the color that shifted, but it's really how dark or how light it is has shifted. A little darker. The value has shifted down to a little bit darker. And I try to keep these planes. I don't try to blend them too much because that's very easy. That's all staying really wet and moist and ready to be blended. I want to see when I'm painting what's on the top, what's on the side, what's on the bottom. And one limitation of Zoom technology right now, or being on Facebook Live, is that I can't hear your beautiful voices. When I teach, I absolutely adore the interruptions and hearing you laugh or respond or question. So I miss that very much, and I hope that I can get it as animated as when I hear your voices. So please keep your questions and comments coming. So what am I painting? The bridge of the nose. I used the tiniest little bit of the yellow ochre here and I'm just changing my brush. I've used the same brush the entire time, but I'm using it differently, either flat to the ground or straight on or with the edge or with a little corner, and that creates different techniques. I have a question from Anne. Will I be adding lighter colors to the nose at some point? Yes, but I'm trying to discipline myself by not putting too many highlights too fast, because highlights is like screaming. And if you use up your tools to add, to call for attention, right, too soon, then you're going to miss that chance. So I try to kind of discipline myself in a way, and I bring up more highlights as needed as I work through the painting. Is there any area that you guys would like to see me paint? Just guide me and I'll go there. Otherwise, I'll just stick to my plan. So here I'm using a little bit to create, here's the highlight N, but using very subdued, not too much, right? Controlling myself, pacing myself like a marathon runner. If you run too fast, like a sprint, at the beginning of your marathon, you're going to be out of breath. So this is what I'm doing, kind of controlling my breath in a way. I have, full disclosure, for the first time dipped into my poppy seed oil, and I think I did it not because I needed to, but by habit. Because I'm so used to, when I use regular thinner, you rely on your poppy seed to get your oil paint going a little bit more and blending a little bit better. It's not even that necessary in this case, but I just, by force of habit, dipped into it. A lot of people wonder how to deal with teeth in the portrait. Why don't we go into, and eyes, great. So let's go into painting the mouth. This is a really great question. So let's paint first the lips. So I'm going to use a little caput mortem. Again, highly recommend this color. Maybe a little bit of a tint of blue to it. And what I'm starting, in order for me to paint the teeth, I need to paint the upper lip first. And before I even painted the upper lip, I painted the muscle around the lip. Notice I didn't start to paint the lip. First, the muscle, the upper muscle below the nose and the mouth. And now I'm going to gently, without outlining, but letting forming the upper lip. And something interesting about the upper lip, in most situations, in a normal lighting condition, whether you're outside or if you're in the studio or in normal lighting conditions, the upper lip will be in shadow because it's at an angle and the mouth casts a shadow there. So that's the first step. I must create a difference. It's never the same tone as the bottom lip. Here I'm going to try to bring a very gentle light to the bottom. You see the shift of tone. It's not by much, but we need to establish that before we do the teeth. So this is really important. And even as I do this, before we do the teeth, we need to create the illusion at the bottom portion of the painting of the muscle that holds the lips together, right? So this is a larger muscle of the mouth, and I need to paint that. I can't, if I just start painting teeth, the painting will look really odd and almost menacing. So I need to create a setting, like with the beautiful jewelry. First you need the setting, then you put in the diamond, right? So we are doing the setting here. And yes, I have another question. Am I using nude instead of linseed oil? Correct. I am using nude for almost the entire painting, and I have a little bit of poppy seed oil, which is similar to linseed oil, which out of habit once in a while I dip into, or just to give me a little bit extra mobility. But mostly I'm using NOOD here. All right, let's start bringing the light around this muscle so we can get inside the mouth and paint the teeth, which is going to be very exciting. But we need to create nice transitions in order for the painting to be believable. All right, so notice how we're wrapping around gently, creating the form. I teach my students on Wednesdays on Zoom from all over the world, and they've heard me talk a lot about the muzzle, this area. I call it the muzzle, right around the mouth. And here, this is part of the muscle as well. So it extends past the lips. Without drawing or painting this, the effect will not be believable. And you could already start to see how that's actually activating what we're doing. Okay, let's see. We still have plenty of time to work out the details and show you some really fun effects. But before I could show you effects, we have to put down the paint, right? We gotta build up a certain amount of paint on our canvas before I'm going to show you some real fun tricks. So stay tuned because it's all building up and coming. All right, let's take a little bit of that white in my dirty brush. Here's for building up a little bit more light into the chin. And I promised you the mouth, but all that is so important. So I must do the environment first. Okay, between the upper lip and the skin of the mouth, right, and the skin of the muscle, we have a little highlight of the skin. So let's just do that. And as I do that, I soften the edge. So notice how the lip is going to soften. And I can actually perfect my drawing and decide how large the lip is. And I get a lot of control. Notice that this size 6 brush can become size 1 brush if I just angle it a certain way, and I can really get into the nooks and crannies of the form. This is an example of it getting a little bit muddy, which is exactly what I want. Now you can actually underdraw with your colored pastels and let some of the tints of the color get into your painting and mix that way as well, which is really fun. Okay, so let's get into painting that mouth. Now, we need to get inside and show the darkness. This is just charcoal, so it doesn't look right. So I'm going to use a little bit of nude, and here is important. I'm going to use no white because the white will disturb that darkness. Let's switch to my, for a moment, for my palette so you could see. I'm going to pull out a little bit of that permanent matter deep. Let's take a little bit more turpentine. Notice how I take the excess off. And let's mix it with, what do I have here? I think I have, I remember, forgot to mention, or maybe I mentioned it earlier, this is ultramarine violet. If I take that ultramarine violet, a little bit of that raw umber, and a little bit of the permanent matter deep, I'm going to get this gorgeous interior of the mouth color. All right, look at that. That's just so beautiful. All right, let's switch back and look at the painting. All right, so here I go to the interior of the mouth. A little bit of a nude turpentine to keep it going. And I want to show that we're seeing inside, but turn it from charcoal into the warm and deeper recesses of the glowing of the mouth. You see how that really changes it. And immediately here I'm going to wipe my brush a little bit. Let's shift it to the little bit of a settled skin on the outside. We've got to go inside and outside the mouth at the same time. This is perhaps the most interesting part about painting, is that you've got to, I think it was maybe Cézanne who said, you've got to paint everywhere at the same time, which can be a little bit maddening, but it's also really exciting because if I'm working on the mouth, that means that it's also the cheek that needs to improve. So you have to jump around your painting and keep in check all the neighboring areas, like here, this lip and the light that's wrapping around it. And we're getting closer and closer to painting the teeth. right? But we've got to set up the stage. I wonder, does anybody else paint portraits? Is there other things that you like to paint? What is it about oil paint or portraiture that you like? Feel free to share. I would love to hear from you what it is that attracts you about portraiture. Here I want to do a little bit of a vertical stroke to show how the lip is rolling out. And at the same time, we need to start working on the cheek a little bit. And I'm going to abandon the mouth. It needs a lot of work still, but I'm going to abandon it in a moment so that I could show you the magic of the teeth. And it's really interesting because the teeth are like eyes. You think of the term white of the eye, but it's never really white, is it? Right? It's always in shadow. So the same thing with the teeth. They're never white inside the mouth in the normal situation because there's shadow falling on them. And that's probably the biggest pitfall that you can fall into. Too bright, it's going to separate from the and look cartoony. So I am trying to mix in a beautiful settled tone, kind of grayish almost. Really not how you want the teeth to look on the commercial of toothpaste, right? But really kind of a tone down. Okay, let's look at that. I'm going to paint the front teeth a little bit inside the mouth. And I'm going to get in and perfect that inside. But that's just my first go. And then I go to the next tooth. Notice that I'm using a little of darkness to show through. I'm not taking my lines and drawing in the lines. What will look like piano keys instead of teeth, right? Like black and white piano keys. So I want to avoid that. So here we go, very subtle. And as the teeth rotate in the round shape of the mouth, we also get the curvature there. So we need to reduce that value darker as we move away from the front. So to the right and to the left, it's even a little bit more darker value, right? As we move, I'm adding a little bit of blue, even though it still seems monochrome, but the blue helps me rotate into darkness, right? And it's really flat here, really flat. See how that's starting to work, right? And I can take my nice little brush, that angle brush that I showed you earlier, and let's just clean up from the inside a little bit with that permanent matte deep and that beautiful ultramarine violet, and maybe a little bit of red. Let's put in that beautiful red that we had before. And here's where the tongue would be and the gums would be underneath. So I want to show a little bit of warmth, not as dark, right? You see how that's changing? Even a little bit of siennas, like a burnt sienna, a little bit something warmer, a little something gentler. I love the painting when it looks like it's going to talk to us, like it's coming to life, like the painting is about to share something and talk to you, right? So here, this is the effect I want in this portrait, as if the subject is trying to communicate. And if we imagine, if we listen hard enough, we're just going to know what he's going to say. Now here, right at the bottom lip, the top portion of the bottom lip, I can use a little bit more color, just right at the roll where it separates the interior and exterior. Do you see how that helped the depth of the mouth? Gigi shared that she loves portraiture because it shows emotion like no other subject. And I absolutely agree with you. And I think portraiture, I mean, I could think about this as a landscape, right? I can think as this as a hill, or eyes could be pool of lakes, right? Watery, like in the landscape, or I can think about it as a still life sometimes, right? With all the textures, but at the same time, so it has all the elements of all the other genres, or even abstraction, right? Because a lot of this, if we zoom in, is quite abstract, but at the same time, it has the spirit that animates, and that is what drives me to portraiture as well. It's really like nothing else. You feel like life comes right underneath your fingers. How's that mouth looking? Tell me what you think about painting teeth and how that's coming out. Let's put a little bit of the texture right below, a little bit of reflected light. And then we'll finish off with playing with the eyes and some textures and some manipulation of the nude that will allow to create unusual and unexpected effects. So here we go a little bit. That's starting to work. Let's use my favorite brush. Let's use this Princeton brush. And here, this is just dry with all of the layers that's been built up with nude and oil paint. And I can just feel the lip and just kind of feel it rolling out. Just rolling out into the muscle of the mouth. I can smooth, even with my finger, the texture that I don't want. But here we go. And then into the chin, rolling out. A little bit of texture. And in the around the muscle area. And into the cheeks. Let's move a little bit this area and sideways in the nose. It creates beautiful planes and moves the paint. Here we go in the eyes. Here in this transition, I can work it a little bit harder. All right, let's do one eye and then you can see how there's a little warmth now in the mouth. There's a little bit of the depth in the mouth and there's the exterior. I'd like to take a little bit bigger brush now. Let's see, what do I have here? A little bit of nude thinner, and I want to soften the outside area of the mouth. So right here, I want to soften it a little bit. You see how much more gentle, and it's not running, it's really helping me just to blend and create a softer transition right here so the mouth feels a little bit more natural. And let's look around on the other side as well. Let's soften that area, that top of the lip. Start to look a little bit more natural, that it belongs to the painting, right? Here, let's do some fun things with the eye. Okay, let's go to the right eye. The same idea. We want to put the white of the eye first, and that is not white, right? It's in shadow. So right in here, I'm going to get in and paint a kind of a murky gray with a little bit of blue, what we call white of the eye, but it's really in shadow. You see, so it almost makes very little difference between what the ground color is, but we need to activate it with the oil paint so we can blend those areas. And you're going to see what I mean in just a moment. All right, so it's a little brighter and we want to get the effect of the eyeball moving around and curving. So we add a little bit of a highlight just to the right of the white of the eye, right here in this lighting condition as he turns towards the light that's hitting him. And I'm going to paint a little bit of the hint of the blue of the iris. So this is the color of the eye. Just a little hint. Here I'm using a tiny little bit of poppy seed oil into my oil paint so that I can manipulate the paint very precise. And a drop of nude, I just dropped it into the nude thinner so I can really manipulate the paint. And I want to make sure that I paint all the way to the edges of the iris so no underpainting shows through and it seems seamless and round, and the iris feels part of the swimming of the eye, as I call it. Here we can just add a little bit of the brilliance on the left side. And I just put a dab, and then I dab my brush into my rag, and I reduce the highlight because we really want it to be shadow. It's kind of an oxymoron, a highlight in the shadow, but that's what we want. So you could see, look at the difference of the two eyes already. I'm going to add a little bit of the rim of the eye with a little brown, a little bit of the turquoise blue. On the right, we see a little rim in the iris, just a tiny little bit. It's very soft and blurred on the left side, so I'm not going to paint that. And then I'm going to paint the pupil. So I'm going to take a little bit of that ultramarine blue, a little bit of brown into it, and I'm going to feel with the blue eye, often the pupil is not very large. It's very sensitive. It contracts with the light. And so you don't see, it's not a huge pupil. And we want to paint that sensitive reaction to make it look more realistic. And now I'm going to set my eye under the skin. So I painted the white of the eye first, the iris next, the pupil next, and now the skin on top. So it will feel like it's floating inside. And we're going to put all those yummy highlights in just a moment. But first I need to put the skin around it so it feels like it lives inside, deeper, protected by the skin. You see how what the difference that makes? And then a little bit of the skin hanging from the upper lid from above right here. I want to paint that as well with a little bit of red, a little bit of ochre. I want to feel how that's from the brow descending down, cascading, creating a curtain. You see the difference? And then a little bit of a highlight here is for Anne. Little highlight there on the side. Still using my nude to build up my paint over here on the right. There we go, a little contrast. Let's do that. And we want to sometimes we want to get inside the eye a little bit and show how watery it is. So for that, I take a little bit of paint at the very edge of my brush and I just press laterally and almost feel like I'm inside the eye, in front of the iris. And that gives a little bit of a watery effect. I'm going to drag the paint a little bit so you could see that happening. So we have a little bit of a, and then down below a little bit more skin. So we have a tear duct and the thickness of the lid below. And let's put in a really cool highlight. So for that, let's do a great highlight. We're going to go to the palette for a second. And this is a real trick. So I dip into my turpentine. Let me put down these brushes. I have so many in my hand. I wipe my brush. I dip into my turpentine. I really want to clean up a little bit. I bring it to the edge. So let's bring the brush to the edge, to a nice edge, so it's nice and flat, right? And next, I dip it into turpentine. I get rid of it a little bit, and then I pick up my paint. So that would be a little bit of a hanging little tip of paint off my brush. So I paint with that little tiny guy, and you're going to see that, my highlight. So I'm actually not going to be using the brush. I'm going to be using what's hanging off the brush, that tiny little bit of a highlight. And the highlight is not a little dot. It actually follows the curvature of the eye. So look at this. We're going to not press the brush and hold my breath so it works, and drag it a little bit, just like that. And now this is when I said you can use turpentine to clean up. I use my turpentine. I might even pick up a different brush that's cleaner. Now let me get another clean brush with a nice edge. I dip it into my nude and I'm going to manipulate the paint from below and get it exactly to the shape I want it. So you see how the eye, it feels three-dimensional and the highlight doesn't feel cartoony, but now we have the curvature, right, of the eye here. And we can also take a larger brush. So let's take something like this. And I can also dip it in a little bit of my nude. And now I can look at my portrait. I can move and smooth and the transitions of the layers. This is all still movable. Thank you, Anne, for saying that there's a ray of life into that eye. I appreciate that comment. And do notice how the turpentine is moving the layers and smoothing the transitions. I kept my plane so I would know what I'm painting, but now it's much smoother and easier to follow. So with a huge brush, right, and just a little, it's a clean brush, a little bit of turpentine and barely touching, very softly touching, I can create this effects. Now I'm going to put a little bit of my nude again and reactivate it and just go over even my charcoal just to show you what happens if you just use it straight into charcoal over the canvas, and it just smooths and turns it into paint very quickly. I can even go over that ear and settle it. I can paint it a little bit later, but this is going to make it permanent, so that charcoal is not going to brush off. Let's quickly clean it up. Let's go into that beautiful ear and fix it and use some of the warm tones. Thank you, Brenda. She says the whole face comes to life. Brenda was in my studio this morning painting an amazing portrait, and so that means a lot to me. And now you could see my secret, Brenda. Usually when I teach, I don't like to make too many demonstrations because I want my students to discover the paint themselves, but here you guys see all my secrets, and I feel like very naked, right? But I also enjoy sharing it so much. A little highlight in the ear. So turning very quickly from that messy look that we saw a second ago into a concrete form. And look how quickly, if we move around the form, again, only using the thinner, not using anything else right now, we can get these beautiful effects. Now, when the painting dries, I would probably give it a second go. And I would use more poppy seed or linseed oil. So I use the nude to get started or to get these fun effects. Now I'm using a little bit of the red in order to show you the translucency. Look at, like, the ear is going to glow a little bit. Yeah, and I see some comments about the paint being sculptural. This is how I always tell my students, don't paint, sculpt, right? I love this idea of, even though we know this is flat, we want to break away from that flat illusion and create a real three-dimensional effect. Let's build up, talking about sculptural. Let's see what time it is. We've got a couple of minutes. We're going to wrap up, so think of your last questions. But I want to just take a little bit of nude and paint thicker. So I've loaded my brush very generously, and now I want to look, with the help of nude turpentine. Now I'm actually building, and I'm going to grab a little bit more, a little thicker effects. And one of the last thoughts I want to leave you with is something I learned from Rembrandt, just by looking at his work. He paints shadows very translucently, and that's most of our painting here in this area. And he paints highlights extremely thick. If you go back to your Rembrandts in local museums or just blow it up on the internet to look at the layers, he builds up the thickness of the light. And you can't quite do, I mean, you can sort of do this with pastel, but really you can do this with oil paint, and the painting really comes to life. Talk about sculptural. Okay, we've held our breath to see that light come on the nose, so let's get that. And in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to come back to you on the screen and share some of the resources you could follow me on and ask more questions. And if you have last minute thoughts, I would like to know them. So let's check what time it is. All right, I'm going to finish up. There's much more to do. I'm going to work on this painting tonight, and I'll be sharing it on my Facebook page as well, and maybe Blick will post it to show you how it transforms. So let's just go back to my main camera. Let's find it. Look at the mess I've made, and that is fun. the best mess you can make is on your palette, right? Out of that mess, it's like the DNA of the paints of the turpentine is really like the DNA that ties all those colors together. Again, I couldn't recommend this product more. I fell in love with it, and I've painted very large paintings, which I want to show you quickly. You can visit my website, zhenyagershman.com, and also Blick has posted some wonderful links into the chat group. You can go to my Blick page and find all of the helpful information about the materials that we use today. You could purchase it directly from that page. But I wanted to show you just a variety of the portraits from the latest series. These are very large, 60 by 60 inches or 82 inches high. And please come and browse and see what I do, and do write your comments. I would love that. And you're also always welcome to visit the Z Art Academy, where I also post a lot of great free educational videos. So, do we have any last minute questions? I would love to hear your thoughts, and then I'll see you next time. We have a question. How many layers do you average? Generally, I let the painting dry for about 5 days from the first layer, and then I come back and I can drip on it, or I can create beautiful translucency with glazing, or I can build up the thick layers. And I'll probably do that at least 2, 3, 4 times. I don't like to leave the painting alone after just one go. I like to see it, like a person develop and have different experiences. And I would love, again, to continue painting this and share it at some later point. Where do I find my subjects? The subjects have to come from the heart, in my opinion, and that could be very simple. Many artists use self-portraits because through knowing ourselves, we can tell deep stories about how we feel about humanity, but it could also be your loved ones, right? And it could also be your friends. I do love to work with very famous faces, recognizable faces, but show them in a way that you couldn't perhaps expect it, to show you something unexpected. Behind me on that side is a very large portrait of the same subject we were talking about today, Alexei Navalny, and I'm showing you a sliver of his personality looking out, as if looking out from his confined jail cell into the world and asking the world for justice. I have a lot of sweet comments thanking me, so I thank you for watching me. What colors, Brenda asked, did I use for final highlights? I actually used the white, the pure white, but there was so much muddiness built up by the initial layers that it didn't look wrong. It just began to sing, mixing with the layers underneath. Well, I thank everybody, and I hope that you follow up with more comments and questions. And I wish everyone happy painting. Choose your subjects from your heart. Try the new nude thinner, and tell me what you think. I wish you a great day.